have 2 o'clock Eastern time, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Akila Peoples. I'm CEO of Mental Health Research Canada, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you here today for this webinar that focuses on youth mental health. As a national organization, our work impacts many lands in Canada. So I am welcoming you today from the city of Toronto, which is located in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And we are most grateful and respectful of this land and grateful to be able to use it. So welcome to many of you that are joining from across the country. At Mental Health Research Canada, we run a number of webinars and try to share knowledge that will be useful in advancing mental health in Canada. Our agenda today is some housekeeping items in a few moments, a brief introduction of Mental Health Research Canada and JAC.org. Then JAC.org is going to do a presentation for about 10 minutes. And then our team is going to present on the major findings of our recent population poll 19. Then we're going to move into a discussion on youth mental health and a question period. So on the housekeeping front, I would just like to offer up a trigger warning. Some sensitive topics may arrive through the discussion portion of this presentation. I wanted to make sure that those that want to opt out can. This session is being recorded and it will be put on our website in the coming days, as all our other webinars are. And we encourage you to share it with colleagues and people in your network who you think may find it interesting or useful. We encourage questions. Please submit those to the chat function on this webinar. And our chat is managed by Brittany Saab, who is Mental Health Research Canada's Senior Manager of Communications. Brittany, thank you for all of your hard work in organizing today's event. They're always a great success and well received. To our panelists, please turn camera on when presenting and remain muted when you're not presenting. I will be going off camera after the introduction so the focus can be on all of you. I mentioned that the research presentation and full recording will be available following the webinar on our website. We appreciate feedback as well. We want to make sure that the effort that goes into organizing webinars and the topics presented are useful. Please connect with us at info@mhrc.ca if you have any feedback or if you have ideas for other areas that would be useful. So at Mental Health Research Canada, we collaborate across all areas of our work. We believe in collective impact. So everything we do in partnership with other organizations in the sector. So I'm very pleased today that we've invited JAC.org into the conversation. I'm sure many of you know JAC.org. They provide education and resources for young people across Canada in supporting their mental health and well-being. And if you're new to Mental Health Research Canada, we are a national charity. Our work impacts all provinces and most territories. We serve to advance mental health knowledge through many different initiatives, including co-funding grants with other like-minded organizations, supporting the talent pool through studentships and fellowships. And we are the organization that tracks, monitors, analyzes, and reports on the mental health of Canadians through our population polling work, which you're going to hear a little bit about today from Poll 19, and that work is supported by Health Canada. So the session today that you're coming into, can I just have the slide, Brittany, just to do quick introductions before we transfer hosting? Just the next slide. So I can, the session we're having today, thank you, Brittany, is Unlocking Youth Mental Health. We're very pleased that on our end, we have Michael Cooper, VP of Development and Strategic Initiatives. Michael leads up our important population polling work. And very pleased today to have the President and CEO of JAC.org, Rowena Pinto. Rowena is has held senior roles in Canadian Cancer Society and UNICEF Canada, and she started her career in federal public service. So Rowena, thanks so much for making it a priority to engage here today and enlighten us with your expertise and experience and all of the great work that Jack.org does. Also joining from Jack.org is Janelle Hansen, who's program coordinator. Janelle, I believe, has been at Jack.org in that role since 2021, so we're very pleased to have her with us here today. And I believe now we're going to share hosting over so that Jack.org can share a presentation. Rowena and Janelle, I believe there's 10 minutes, and I'm going to politely give you a 2-minute warning when there's just 2 minutes left. So hope you don't mind with that. And without further ado, welcome and thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise and joining in this very important conversation. We know that our data consistently shows that young Canadians are much more likely to suffer from poor mental health. So this is a topic not to be ignored, very important for now and for the future of our country. So thank you both and to your whole team for the important work that you do at Jack.org. So I think we can share hosting now over to Jack.org.
Great. Thank you so much, Shaquila. And it's really a big pleasure for us to be joining you here today to discuss this incredibly important subject. As you mentioned, youth mental health has gained a great deal of attention in the past few years, making headlines during the pandemic as an intensifying emergency and one that many people were watching unfold firsthand as they quarantined with the young people in their lives. I was one of those people. I had 3 young people, one who became a teenager during the pandemic. So I can speak firsthand, as I'm sure many of you can, to what was actually going on at that time. However, what we're going to hear today is that the declining trend that we are hearing so much about around youth mental health actually predates the pandemic. And in fact, we've been noticing troubling trends in our youth mental health since 2009. So we're incredibly grateful to Mental Health Research Canada for the work that they're doing to illuminate the challenges young people are facing today. And I'm looking forward to talking to all of you about the work that Jack.org is doing to provide young people with the education and tools they need to get the support they need, and on how we build up young people's resilience and set them up with the foundation they need to build mentally healthy lives. So before we get into all of that, just a reminder as to who we are. I'm Rowena, and I am being joined by Janelle, who you have already heard introductions. So just to let you know, I use the pronouns she and her. I'm Jack.org's president and CEO. And I've come to this conversation from a place of wishing I had access to the mental health education and support that Jack.org provides when I was growing up. So when I was growing up in school, in my first job, in my family life, in my friend circle, we didn't have the education we needed about mental health. In fact, mental health was something that you whispered about, something that you were shy to mention because of all of the stigma. I witnessed so many people around me struggling in silence and missing out on the support that would have helped them because of the stigma and lack of ability to put what we were experiencing into words and to ask for help. So now that I'm raising my own 3 kids and working with young people at Jack.org, I'm aware of 2 things. Young people's mental health is being challenged like never before. But also, this generation of young people is more aware of mental health struggle than the generations that have come before them. And young people are looking for ways to support themselves and their friends and classmates. In fact, they are often at the front lines of the youth mental health crisis. So what we need to do as adults in their lives is to be providing young people with the education, skills, and resources that they need to look out for themselves and their peers. And so let's get into how Jack.org is working to do that. We can go to the next slide. So Jack.org is a Canadian charity that was founded in 2013, devoted to working with young people to build communities and health systems that support mental health. We work with young people in every province and territory to deliver mental health education presentations, run mental health initiatives on campuses and communities, provide spaces for peer-to-peer support to take place, and run educational trainings on how to support someone who is struggling with their mental health. What I find most exciting about what our work is that we work upstream. So our focus is on the prevention side of mental health. We know that the youth mental health struggle is on the rise, and we want to make sure that young people are not just reaching out for support when a crisis hits. We don't want a young person's first mental health diagnosis to happen in the emergency room. When the first signs of mental health struggle arise, we want young people to be able to recognize that what they're dealing with and to reach out to a friend, to a parent, or a teacher or a counselor so that they're able to find the support and not have to navigate their mental health struggle alone. Over to you, Janelle.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Rowena. Yeah, we can dive right into it. I think we can take a minute now to just hear about the work that we're doing across Canada. And I'm going to show you folks that by just playing a quick video. Please let me know if the sound plays. Okay.
1 in 7 young people in Canada report having suicidal thoughts. There are even more who struggle with other forms of mental distress. How many don't reach out? How many more are affected by the systemic barriers that limit access to essential mental health services? What if we could change that? As Canada's leading charity empowering young minds to rethink mental health, Jack.org strives to open the dialogue, create a supportive community, and end the stigma surrounding mental health. With workshops, youth talks, community groups, online programs, and digital tools, we have one goal in mind: to put young people front and center when promoting positive mental health. Youth are the most powerful advocates when it comes to driving change in their own communities.
Understanding that I can make such a huge impact on my own well-being was one of the biggest moments for me.
Any contribution to Jack.org helps to create a world where young people are mentally healthy and better equipped to deal with the stress. You can help us get there.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So yeah, our goal is kind of to really build a country where young people can deal with distress and build mentally healthy lives. I really like seeing that video just because there's a lot of young folks that I've connected with at this organization who I work with closely. So that video is close to my heart. But yeah, here at Jack.org, our work is focused on really getting young people in every part of the country the critical mental health education that they need. Our programs teach young people an array of things, such as what mental health is and what factors affect it, what signs of a struggle look like, and how to have supportive conversations that don't cause harm to the young person doing the support work or the young person receiving that same support work. And then our programs also teach young people when and how to reach out for support from a professional. Equipped with this education, young people really just become advocates for themselves, but also their peers. And they're really better able to navigate and negotiate the mental health support that they need for themselves if and when a mental health struggle arises. So Rowena, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Janelle. And we know that this work is essential because young people's mental health today is in a state of crisis. Mental illness affects at least 1.2 million young people in Canada, and rates of hospitalization for youth mental health disorders are on the rise. Amongst wealthy nations, Canada's youth mental health indicators rank in the bottom third, and we have one of the highest adolescent suicide rates amongst those nations. And what's most troubling and what we need to be devoted to changing is that only 20% of young people who need support with their mental health actually get it. Preventative measures and early intervention present an incredible opportunity to reduce the long-term social and economic costs and burden of mental illness in Canada. What we also know is that adolescence and early adulthood are absolutely pivotal periods for people when it comes to their mental health. Many mental illnesses have their onset during this period of time, and so young people are having their first experiences navigating for support within their peer groups and within the health system. A bad experience with either can mean that people shut down and stop seeking support that would improve or potentially save their lives. And so we need to make sure every young person has access to the mental health education they need to understand what they're going through, seek support from their peers, and navigate the mental health system. This allows them to have a fair shot at establishing a mental health care routine and support system that will set them up for success, navigating mental health in the long term.
Perfect.
Over to you, Janelle.
Thank you. So yeah, there are a few avenues where we go about doing this work. So that could be in classrooms, on campuses, and of course in community settings. But our programming is really focused on empowering peer-to-peer connection and support. The reality is that young people are often the first ones to either notice when a peer is struggling or be the one that the person is confining in, or they're confining in a friend when they're going through a mental health struggle. In a survey that we did with our network, about 83% of young people said that they supported a friend struggling with their mental health, but only about 39% of them felt that they were prepared to offer the support that was needed. So what's important to understand is that they're doing this support work already. Young people are doing this support work already. What we're doing at jack.org is just training them to have these conversations safely and confidently. I think it's also important to emphasize that young people are active players here as well. We need their perspectives, their ideas, their feedback when we're talking about how to create solutions that will work for them. All of our core programs here at jack.org are co-designed with young people because we want to build solutions and resources that speak to both their needs and their experiences. Rowena, I'll pass it over to you.
Janelle, you have 1 minute, 1 minute left.
Okay, we're getting there. We're almost there. And so we do know that the progress we've made in reducing stigma in the mental health space, but that hasn't reached everyone. Many communities are still plagued by stigma and systemic barriers that prevent them from getting the mental health support they need. And that is why we're currently working with young people and partners to develop new resources to support the needs of Indigenous, Black, newcomer, and 2S LGBTQ+ youth, because we know that these youth face distinct challenges when it comes to addressing mental health issues and accessing support. Our work is currently focused on developing partnerships with other mental health organizations and scaling our programs alongside them and youth to better be able to speak to the concerns of these groups. Maybe I'll ask you to go to the next slide. So I just wanted to thank everyone for the time that you all took to learn a bit more about jack.org. If you would like to get in touch with us, please check out our website, email us, or follow us on social media. And with that, I'll pass over to the Mental Health Research Canada team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually passing over to my colleague, Michael Cooper now. Michael, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you for that presentation, Janelle and Rowena. I found some fascinating things that I want to touch on later about youth mental health and how it follows you for life and prevention early on and the value of that, as well as some interesting nuances between mental health consumption and literacy, which are not actually the same concept. And why literacy matters, I think, also is important. And I don't know, there's some great studies on that, which I will touch on in the comment section. But first, I just really want to talk about our project and how it intersects what you're doing as well. So Mental Health Research Canada has been collecting mental health indicators since March and April of 2020, when we realized at the very start of the pandemic, a few weeks in, that mental health was going to be significantly impacted by the pandemic and lockdowns and the disconnects between people. And thanks to support from financial support from Health Canada, we've been able to continue that work until at least March of 2025, and hopefully beyond that. My colleague Brittany has played a key role in that project, and I see a number of my colleagues who work on this project have joined as well too. So appreciate all the work they do. This particular conversation is about Poll 19, which was our 19th data collection, which I believe we collected in January of 2024 and reported on in February, approximately 3 to 4 weeks earlier. My head's a little bit out of this one because we collect once per quarter, and we're already deep into our planning for our 20th collection, which should start in the next week and a half, where we'll be reporting again on our mental health indicators of Canadians at some point in May, about 5 weeks from now, approximately. So I'm happy to speak about Poll 19 and just give you a sense of it. So we polled about 3,200 Canadians approximately, as we do once per quarter. And about 70% of our project remains static, and 30% are questions we move in and out to try and understand what's going on with mental health indicators. One thing that we noted that was, I think, particularly troubling is that we had actually saw continued negative trends of negative mental health since the start of since the end of the pandemic. So what we saw for self-rated mental health was approximately 22, 23, peaking around 28% of Canadians indicating high anxiety. And then at around April 2022, we started seeing a significant improvement in mental health very quickly. But then right after that immediate end of the pandemic improvement, things have been getting steadily worse since. And what we've seen now is that the indicators from January 2024 are worse than they've been since the pandemic, with approximately 12% of Canadians indicating high anxiety and 11% indicating high depression on self-rated scales. We, of course, check this against Kessler and PHQs and GADs and clinical screeners. So that's troubling to see that the mental health indicators have been getting worse. And it's the same groups that we've seen progressing for the last 2 years, getting worse. Youth, especially young women. LGBTQ has been a group that we've been particularly concerned around. Newcomers to Canada as well have been groups that we've seen particularly higher levels of negative mental health. To a lesser degree, parents, we've seen that as well. So in this particular poll, and I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, Brittany or Shauna, or to put the Poll 19 link into the chat so that people can actually download the full report. It's quite extensive. We looked at a question around screen time. We looked at professional screen time, school screen time, and personal screen time. And what was particularly troubling was that we saw significantly worse negative mental health indicators for anyone who had more than 6 hours of personal screen time in a day. While this isn't particularly surprising to a lot of people who have studied this issue, the numbers were very stark and distressing, and especially for young people between the age of 16 to 34, we saw significant increases in negative mental health, anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation tied to screen time as well. This particular poll, we also looked at the intersectionality of climate change with mental health. And while we did find that 70% of individuals were at least concerned around climate change, because of course not everyone's concerned around climate change, we wanted to draw that delineation. We also noticed that only 5% of people who indicated they were concerned around mental health, around climate change, indicated it was having a very high, strong negative impact on their mental health. So what we took away from that was that while there are concerns around climate change, it was not the most significant contributing factor, even among young people, for their mental health. What we did see a lot of negative mental health indicators more closely aligned with economic insecurity than we did with climate change as specific indicators of negative mental health. It was stronger for housing insecurity, economic insecurity in general was stronger for younger people as well. We did our last collection on chronic pain. We did find that 27% of Canadians are currently living with a chronic pain disorder, which was higher than we actually thought it was going to be. And I think the part that was most surprising for us is it was not all concentrated among the elderly. There was a wide swath of even young Canadians who were indicating a degree of chronic pain as well, which was certainly surprising for us. This was also the first collection we looked at the new 988 crisis suicide helpline, with about half of Canadians being aware of it, which is significantly higher than previous mental health initiatives that have been launched. So most Canadians are aware of the 988 line, and about 3% of Canadians have indicated they have already used it. 3% of 40 million Canadians is over 1 million Canadians who have indicated they've already used the line. And a number of Canadians, I don't think it's here, but it was like 8 to 9, 10, 11% of Canadians indicated that they had heard someone or knew someone who would use the line. So right off the bat, that is actually drawing quite a bit of awareness and opportunities for people to outreach on that. I do encourage anyone who's interested in looking into our fulsome reports. We've published well over 1,000 pages of stats and data pertaining to mental health. And we do both the polls and we do deep dive research briefs looking into specific groups, so that people can look into deep dives into aggregate data on specific things. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has them about specific things you might have looked at. Next slide. So I think we're moving on to questions. Yeah.
Time to dive into the questions.
I've got the questions here in front of me, and I guess I will pose them to Rowena and Janelle. Hold on, I'll pull up the questions right here. So something you touched on, we study data and indicators of mental health. We've of course been tracking negative mental health indicators for young people, especially young women, since 2020. But I'm aware of studies that go back all the way to 2015, including StatsCan, which showed a greater divergence of mental health indicators. It used to be that there were more, it was closer between young people and all other age groups in terms of mental health indicators. But there was a significant divergence at some point pre-pandemic. I generally track it back to 2014. I think you said 2009. I'm curious in terms of what you think is driving some of those more negative mental health indicators since before the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I think young people today are dealing with stressors unlike those that came before them. They're most acutely affected by the mental health impacts of the global pandemic, of course, but they're also dealing with the rise of comparison culture and cyberbullying that comes with the dominance of social media as a way of kind of interacting with their peers. This is something that's close to my heart because as a woman growing up, like this is something social media came into play when I was in the 9th grade, so I can definitely feel for this. I think social media for young women is especially harmful. There are links between high social media use and high levels of body dissatisfaction, disordered eating behaviors, social comparison, and low self-esteem, especially among young adolescent girls. I think adolescent girls and transgender youth are disproportionately impacted by online harassment and abuse as well, which is associated with negative emotional impacts like feeling sad, like feeling anxious, like feeling worried. And research shows that I think nearly 6 in 10 adolescent girls say that they've been contacted by a stranger on a certain social media platform in ways that make them feel comfortable. And I think that's something that we need to be looking more closely at. I think there are currently too few supports that support young people online. So we need to do more research to really fully understand the impact that social media is having on our young people. And we also need to be able to really set reasonable boundaries around social media use and understand that social media does actually poses a profound risk of harm when it comes to the mental health and well-being of our young people. Um, I think a couple other things that I want to add is that we also, I think, need to think about the other emerging stressors that young people are dealing with. Kind of circling back to some things that you mentioned before, young people are grappling with the reality of climate and the affordability crisis, which we know is, of course, affecting young people's sense of security and their hopes for the future. And I think all this in a culture where mental health is still dominated by stigma and silence and a lack of adequate resourcing for sure. Essentially, if we want this to change, we need to recognize the crisis that young people are facing and take urgent steps to really improve the conditions that young people that young people are in, and build mental health literacy and resilience, like you mentioned earlier, and really work with youth to understand the problems that they're facing to build those solutions.
Before I ask Rowena if she has any additional thoughts, I do want to mention I'm really ashamed that you were the first person to mention resiliency as a key factor, that something that we've looked at and is a really important thing, which is, this counterbalance of how do we make youth more resistant to negative mental health indicators. There's a lot of pictograms and infograms out of the Harvard Brain Story, which I know gets driven out of the Palix Family Wellness Initiative out of Alberta, that does some really good work showing and diagramming how resiliency is so important, and it can be baked into youth at such an early age, as like a strong muscle. And I'm ashamed I didn't mention. I'm glad you did. But taking away from that aside, Rowena, did you want to comment on anything about why you think youth mental health might have diverged significantly earlier than the pandemic?
Actually, I think Janelle did a great and complete job, to be honest. I think there's a lot of different indicators and all of them. Also, I think one big piece is just the age that we're talking about. We know already that group of young people between the ages of 13 to 25 are going through probably the biggest changes of any other demographic. And so they actually is at that point that they start to move away from the key support systems that have been taking care of them up until that point.
Yeah.
They start to spend more and more time with strangers or colleagues or their peers. And all of that can be discombobulating. So I think, there's much more pressure to succeed. We know financial issues are an issue, housing, all the issues that fall onto our shoulders as older adults are not escaping those of young people. And if anything, they are worried about the future that they are potentially inheriting. So I think all of that combined is leading to where we are, and we haven't adequately even figured out as a healthcare system how to fully support young people as they make that transition from the children's system into the adult system.
I'm going to move on to the next question. So we've been talking about stigma, and we have also noted that there are lower levels of stigma in mental health among youth. We've actually asked and collected data that asks people with diagnosis, what do you think the biggest issues are in mental health? And stigma continues to rank among the highest among all Canadians, but the rates of stigma being a primary concern are lower among young people. So it remains a concern, but it's better among young people. We've also studied mental health consumption, and what we've seen is young people are about 4 times as likely to consume mental health content compared to those over the age of 55. So they're consuming a huge amount of mental health. They're more comfortable talking about it. They're more comfortable reading about it. But the thing that we've also studied is we've studied concepts, terminology, and literacy in mental health. So are people aware of the words to properly explain mental health? Are they aware of concepts like correlations between substance use potentially and mental health? Or the differences between abnormal stress or abnormal reactions to stress versus what a stressful bad day just looks like? And do people understand these conceptuals? And what was interesting to me, though, was that youth in our studies did not actually score or perform better pertaining to literacy. but they scored significantly better in stigma and consumption, but not on actually understanding. And I've always sort of thought that what we're seeing is a lot of people consuming mental health content, but they're not moving deeply enough into understanding their own mental health. And so really my question, very long preamble, I got throwing a lot of our own stats in there. What do you think should be the priorities for improving mental health literacy among young people? And how do we do it?
Janelle, you're good if I take this one? Okay, you can take the next one. Perfect. So that's, first of all, really interesting finding. And it's one that we've also seen here at jack.org. As mentioned, we work in the prevention space. So we really are trying to understand what has changed for young people and how we can better support themselves. So the challenge we are witnessing is that a lot of young people today are exposed, as you mentioned, to a lot of digital mental health content, but not all of it is accurate. And so young people are spending hours of their days on social media, and that's where they're learning a lot of their mental health terminology from someone or organizations even who aren't necessarily qualified to be teaching them about it. And there's a lot of misinformation about mental illness, signs of mental health struggle, available supports, and the misinformation that ends up being amplified when young people pass it on to their friends. Social media is also a poor place, as all of us know, to really ask questions and deal with ambiguity. So we really do need spaces where young people can learn from credible sources, hear from one another about experiences with mental health and illness, and feel safe enough to share their questions and concerns. So our priority from our perspective is really about investing more in mental health education resources that will build true mental health literacy so that young people are better able to distinguish between optimal and suboptimal mental health and have a safe space to ask questions and practice their learnings. And that's where the peer-to-peer approach is so important, because as young people enter adulthood, they're often looking to their peers. They aren't looking to your regular authority figures. And that's why we spend so much time investing in young people building up their own knowledge so that they can share that with their peers. Another thing, though, that I think is going to be really important, I was talking to some colleagues out in Australia, and this is something that they've been also advocating for, is that we need to develop more digital literacy education when it comes to mental health to help young people understand the risk and harm that comes from social media use and heavy screen time, as well as signs that their social media use is becoming unhealthy. We are starting to understand, even as older adults that didn't grow up with social media, really some of the damage that certain algorithms have caused, and how certain things that might not have any effect on me are actually geared towards young people staying very addicted or being part of social media in ways that are not healthy for themselves, that keep them there when even they might want to actually leave. And so what we haven't done well, and that's probably because we're all learning together, but we almost need to pause and start to really go back to young people and say, this is how social media is affecting you, and here is what you can do to actually take much more control of what shows up on your feeds and how you deal with it and how you look at information. So increased mental health and digital literacy, along with spaces for young people to connect and learn in person, are critical steps to ensuring the well-being of young people today. If we don't provide youth with this education, we risk their health today and fail to set them up with really those routines and boundaries that would support them down the road.
Janelle, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just kind of briefly on the social media front, I couldn't agree more, and I know I'm a little bit biased agreeing with Rowena, but I truly couldn't agree more. I think this conversation, like I said earlier, it strikes a chord in me because I was the generation that's grown up with social media. A few years ago, I decided to kind of get rid of all my social media because it was affecting my mental health so terribly. But I know that's not always. It wasn't an easy process, and it's not always an easy thing to do for young people, especially when everybody around you, all your peers are on social media using these platforms. So I think, just to add on to Rowena's point, just developing those those resources that provide us with the literacy, the digital literacy are so important. So yeah.
Great. So you mentioned something about peer support networks and the importance of that. How do we build more peer support networks to ensure that we're actually addressing some of these mental health needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having access to a community that will support us is I guess protective for our mental health. It's no surprise that when things get tough, it's our communities that we turn to for support and comfort. They might be the ones that we check in with, or that check in on us, help us reach out to professional supports, or even just take us to an appointment to see a mental health professional like a therapist. I think every young person in Canada should really have access to a network line like this one. And to that end, we need to build more spaces of safety and belonging in places where young people can spend their time. So again, on campuses, in schools, in community settings. Our chapters program here at Jack.org, we actually operate with this model in mind. Our chapters, they often offer physical spaces where students on campuses or in schools or in community settings can come and learn about mental health and the resources that they can access to gain support. Our chapters are also places where people can go to meet other young people and make those connections. So again, building that sense of community. One story that comes to mind that I always love sharing is about one of our network members named Ahmad, who joined our Dalhousie University Jack chapter as a newcomer to Canada. It was the students a part of this chapter, the students that Ahmad met there, and the conversations that he had with them that allowed him to learn about his mental health, and eventually become a leader on campus advocating for better supports for students just like him, students who would come into the school as newcomers as well. So I think just having a space to go and ask questions and learn with your peers can be utterly transformative. So I think, yeah, we need to really be investing in spaces like this for our youth. But it's also important to remember that these spaces, they must also be co-designed with young people, so they are youth friendly. So making spaces where young people want to hang out and be with one another is so key. But also asking young people what they need out of these spaces as well. Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is that we kind of need to move away from making decisions unilaterally without consulting young people, because it's their health who we're trying to look after, essentially.
So I wanted to really ask an open-ended question. This one's going to be a little more challenging, I think. So for example, on our last collection, we looked at screen time and mental health. Certainly, we've seen some of the economic indicators that have been driving a lot of negative youth mental health. And especially when I'm thinking about the fact that earlier today, the federal government announced $500 million for youth mental health in the community. And I'm sure we'll be going through a process of trying to figure out how best to invest that money. I'm wondering, of the findings that we have in terms of the areas that we should be looking at, or of the things that deserve more attention, what things do you think are most surprising to you in terms of areas of need? And then the flip side of that, which is, where could we be making some critical investments in youth mental health?
That's a nice big question there, Michael. Okay, we
like
will
big
try and respond to that. First of all, we found your research around screen time incredibly interesting. But we will say that we did not find it surprising. We've actually been surveying our own young people in our network, and they've been telling us for years that social media and comparison culture are stressors in their lives. So I'm glad to see that the relationship between screen time and poor mental health is getting the attention it deserves. When you're talking about what we would like to to hear even more about is we're especially interested in getting a better understanding of how screen time affects youth differently. As Poll 19 highlights, there are certain negative effects associated with too much screen time, but we know just from our interactions with young people that it's a bit more of a complicated picture as well. And we've heard that young people that actually some of them are finding social media to be a real refuge for them as well. Where they might not have the kinds of connections that they need when it comes to supporting their own mental health within their own physical environment, they actually are able to connect with people online and create communities that can be really integral to building a sense of belonging, especially for those who are remote or are facing stigmatization from the people in their real lives. It would be really interesting to see more guidance from young people themselves on how we can create more safe social media use that enables young people who are really using this space to connect in a positive way. How can we protect them, or how can they protect themselves, I guess is even a better way of saying it, when it comes to making those connections online, and what types of informed decisions do they need to make when they use their screens. In terms of what needs more attention more broadly, we're always hungry to understand the differences in experience and need amongst youth. Young people are often talked about, and I've been doing it myself even today, as this monolith. And we all know in reality that is not the case. So we know that while there's been a lot of progress when it comes to stigma reduction amongst a lot of young people in Canada, we know that this is not necessarily the case for all young people. And for many, it's almost like the last 10 years has not happened. So a lot of the great work that we've had, where we actually are now speaking about mental health very openly, that isn't necessarily been felt by communities. So our approach has always been to work with young people to develop resources that suit their specific concerns and address challenges that they and their peer groups are dealing with. But we need more support and research that really builds on young people's different experiences so that we can help to customize solutions to face the challenges and make them much more relevant, whether that be from a cultural perspective or from a racial perspective, or even whether you live in a rural versus an urban setting. So we can't create systems that support youth without really understanding what they're dealing with and speaking to them directly about what solutions are needed and how they should be administered.
Janelle, anything you wanted to add? I want to respond to that if you don't.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add on to the piece about the funding that the announcement that was made. I think a good place to put that money, if you will, would be into kind of training, educating our teachers as well, teachers and educators. I think one of the best places, well, there's no doubt that one of the best places to reach young people is within our schools. Nowhere else are we really granted a chance to reach so many young people with mental health education from a trusted source, such as their teachers, in a safe environment. So I think if you were to ask me, where should this money go? I think definitely within our schools, training our teachers, because teachers are a fundamental resource for students, but they're also often lacking the resources that they need to kind of support the mental health of their own students. Me personally, I'm currently enrolled in a program that's learning about mental health education within children and youth from a teacher's perspective, and it's wild learning about certain things. I think teachers can really make the world of a difference in a young person's life, and they need kind of the support to be able to do that. I will shamelessly plug one of the resources that we have here at jack.org. It's called our Educators Hub. And it's a resource it's kind of a library of resources that we have for educators to turn to and use to bring some vital mental health lessons into their classroom curriculum. So just again, if that funding was to go anywhere, I would say into those into those resources that are supporting teachers so they can continue to have lucrative and meaningful, thoughtful, and knowledgeable conversations with their young people to better equip them with supporting themselves.
First off, I want to say you said many things I was going to say. Second thing is a nice periodic shameless plug, fully supportive of, as long as we don't go overboard. And the only thing I would add to what you said as well is I actually don't think, I think parents are part of this as well too, that schools can also engage with the parents of those children, because I'm 100% sure every parent wants to support their child's mental health. And so that's an important ally in that discussion as well, that I wanted to highlight. And I wanted to also highlight both of our organizations care a lot about the upstream. And I think one thing that was sort of undermining earlier commentary about literacy is the more literate you are, the more likely you are to seek help when you need it and not seek help when you don't need it. You become a better self-advocate, which means you probably need less help. So a lot of this is that upstream prevention work that we're talking about. I wanted to highlight that we're not saying that downstream emergency rooms aren't important. I'm saying it's much cheaper and easier to support an individual on a broader group of individuals with resiliency training, with supports for literacy, with understanding how to build support systems around them at a younger age in mechanisms like school, where they're essentially a captive audience already. And I don't think it's fair to expect teachers to be miracle workers. They often already are. But how do we best enable them to do that in conjunction with all the other demands that they're getting? And really, from my personal experience, this is not my data hat, this is my parent hat as a parent of children in school. I often find the literacy is not sufficient among teachers as well, is that they often don't understand some of these things. I'm sure many do, but there could be a lot more understanding at that level to help them support, because they might understand it a bit, but you really have to be, in order to be comfortable teaching something, you really have to know it fairly well. So I do think that's an area of gap, and I know I'm answering my own question, but I get to do that, so that's fine. So the last question I wanted to ask, and I know there's a few questions popping up in the chat. I think we've answered this a little bit, but we talked about some of the challenges the young people have today that they may not have had before, or might be worse than they were before. And we talked a little bit about how parents can support young people, teachers can support young people as well. But what sort of resources should we be providing to adults, teachers, to help them help young people in their lives who might be struggling with mental health?
Sure, Rowena, are you okay if I take this one? I like talking about this stuff. Yeah, I think we all have a role to play, and young people need support of their leaders. And I like the term leaders because it kind of sums up what some of the terms we've been throwing out there: parents, teachers, coaches. Are there any adults in their lives that they trust and look up to? So many adults I know are aware of what young people are dealing with, and they really want to know how to help. I speak to a lot of educators as part of my job here at jack.org, and constantly they're like, what can we do? My father is a principal and he's always coming to me, Janelle, what can I do? My advice is to take action. Navigating how to take action might not be, it's a lot easier said than done, but one thing that I always love to recommend to people, another shameless plug coming here, but it's our Be There certificate at jack.org. For those of you who don't know, our Be There certificate, it's a free online course that's designed to give you the knowledge and the skills to really start a conversation about mental health and show support for a peer, a loved one, a colleague, and just really help them to get the professional support that they need. It's a quick certificate, takes about 2 hours to complete, and it's very interactive, and it has different scenarios that are relevant to young people, but also there's one scenario in particular that's relevant to adults and those who are taking care of young people in their lives. And I really can't recommend it enough. I can't recommend enough that people take the time to educate themselves, because you really never know when you're going to be called upon to provide support for someone that you care about. And I think completing the certificate can create a much clearer path on how to have these conversations and really be there for somebody. Um, Within the certificate itself as well, we kind of have 5 actionable items, and they're called our Be There 5 Golden Rules. And they're steps that you can take in any scenario to just get that baseline level of support. But yeah, we can't really be complacent about mental health. The more people who get involved, are the more people who are a part of the solution, and we'll be able to really turn the tide in favor of bettering the mental health outcomes for our youth and the young people in our lives. So yeah.
So I'm looking at the time, and I was planning on opening it up to questions at 3 o'clock. So we're a couple minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm going to ask if you had any questions you wanted to throw out there before we open it up to the broader chat. Is there anything you wanted to know about our data or anything else you wanted to throw out there?
I personally just have a comment. I think the data that you folks provide it's truly amazing. Like I know kind of youth mental health is I'm sometimes tunnel vision. It's really all I focus on, but the data is it's true and it's relevant. So I think yeah, I just great work to you folks for sure.
And I'm going to in turn defer because there's some fantastic people who are working on this data. It's my privilege to get to speak about it, but really it's the fantastic individuals, many of which who are here talking about it. And honestly, I think my great frustration with it is that we can only collect data as young as 16. And we do very diligently look at that 16 to 24 cohort. There's obviously complications when you start getting younger in terms of consent issues and making sure that a parent's informed, and it adds. I mean, we're data nerds. We think about the methodologies and complexities of this more than anything. But I do know, having studied this for very closely for 4 years now, that youth mental health is clearly an area of needed investment. Clearly an area that if we actually can get this right, we're going to be fixing or improving mental health for a generation in front of it, which is as upstream as you can get. We've been interviewing a number of people with diagnoses of mental health in long form interviews. And so many of them have told us that their mental health issues really started in their youth, and they just weren't able to speak about it. They weren't able to do it. And now it's become a lifelong challenge. And so to me, it's a no-brainer to think about these issues. So Rowena, before we open up to questions, any last comments?
No, again, this has been a great conversation so far. So really looking forward to continuing. I think the more we talk about this and the more we find allies, I think it's a big issue that a lot of us are going to need to get involved in to really turn the tide. So thank you for the work you do.
Great. I'm going to throw it to Brittany to ask any questions she wants.
Hi again, and thank you all so much. That was a fantastic discussion, so insightful. A lot of the questions that were asked were at the very least touched on, but I'm going to ask them again just in case there's anywhere that you want to expand on your answers, or just a chance to kind of revisit them. So going back to the beginning, we had a question, are there any insights related to incorporate user experience and people with lived experience in the forefront to support capacity building? And are there any suggestions on how to motivate and engage youth? It's kind of a big question.
Sorry, can you ask that again slower? It was complicated.
Yeah, sure. Let me bring that up again. Are there any insights related to incorporate user experience and people with lived experience in the forefront to support capacity building? And a follow-up question is, are there any suggestions on how to motivate and engage youth?
I think a lot of that goes to jack.org about programming. I would say from our end, we have the unique opportunity that we can ask individuals with diagnoses or who have been accessing services to provide commentary on anything. And it does inform our work in terms of trying to, as I said, we have long form interviews, so we can ask individuals about their experience. We've asked, I think we're at over 10,000 people with diagnoses that we've talked to and asked them what their priorities are. And that informs our work every day. We don't have programs, so Maybe Janelle or Rowena wants to talk about that from a programming perspective.
Sure, I can jump in, and Janelle, then maybe you can jump in as well, since you're probably even closer to it than I am. Our philosophy at jack.org is everything is co-designed with young people. So all of our programming incorporates the lived experiences of young people. So for example, we have a program called Jack Talks, which are delivered most often by a young person who has lived experience with mental health. And they are trained here at jack.org, and then they often go out into schools or other communities of young people and have conversations. So we have a number of different Jack Talk offerings. We have like basic mental health 101, or, for those young people who are more sophisticated in their knowledge of mental health, there are opportunities to do a deeper dive. So we work primarily through educational institutions to deliver our Jack Talks. But as mentioned, what I think a lot of young people in the audience find so insightful is that the person who is delivering it has lived through it themselves. So they incorporate through safe storytelling something about their own experience with mental health. And I think that connection and the fact that they themselves have been played a part in building, but are also delivering content that they themselves find of value, I think goes a long way versus someone like me, for example, going in and trying to do the same thing. I think there's a connection that's built immediately, and a credibility that's built immediately when you are incorporating young people with lived experience into any type of solution. And I think anytime we've ever, as a society, failed is when we think that young people actually are not well equipped to help develop those solutions. I think they are the experts in their own lives. We should look at them as partners, as consultants, and that's how I think we're going to be successful in terms of turning the tide. Janelle?
Yeah, thank you, Rowena, for sharing that, especially highlighting our Jack Talks program. I think one thing I'll also add is just, and this might come as also an additional strategy for everyone on this call to take back with them, but one of the things that we also speak about within our Jack Talk, it's called the 3 C's, and again, this could be a way that young people. This is something that we teach young people to kind of utilize when they're trying to work through, navigate with their mental health. But the 3 C's essentially stand for control, competency, and community. So when you're looking to kind of ground yourself within your mental health or kind of reset, bring yourself back, first thing you want to think about is think about the things that are in your control. I love this because I am an overthinker and I tend to just think about all these things that are not in my control. So think about the things that are in your control, the things that you have the power to change and not thinking about the things that you don't have the power to change. Secondly would be competence, or something that you're competent in, doing something that you're good at. Again, thinking to myself, I love woodworking, for those who don't know, which is probably everybody. So putting myself to use, making sure to use my hands, that makes me feel grounded. And then community. I think we've said the word community many times on this call, but turning to your community, the people that uplift you, the people that make you feel strong and allow you to shine as bright as you can. Turning to those people when you're having a hard day, but also leaning on them when you might be having a good day as well. So just things like that are things that we teach, that young people speak to other young people about within our Jack Talks. And the Jack Talk in its totality is really just, I think, a great tool for young people to learn about those strategies and those methods to supporting not just their mental health, but again, the mental health of someone they care about.
Thank you so much. And kind of to expand on that, Rowena and Janelle, I know you spoke to addressing mental health challenges before they kind of move into a crisis situation. But we had a question curious about whether jack.org can speak to specific preventative initiatives. So you have spoken to that a little bit more. I was wondering if there's any thing that you'd like to elaborate on. I think specifically, not just before it gets to a crisis situation, but even beforehand, and just my interpretation of that question that might stem back to something along the lines of mental health literacy, but I'll leave it up to you to interpret.
Yeah, Rowena, I can.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you start. Go ahead, Janelle. Go.
I was just gonna building off of, again, my brain is full of Jack Talk information, but again, within the Jack Talk itself, we work to educate young people on how to recognize warning signs. So of course, we don't want to, like, the goal is to prevent the mental health crisis, but we coach people on how to recognize warning signs. So being able to identify when someone that you care about might be going through a mental health struggle, and how to recognize these things before they get to the crisis stage. So that can be if you notice that things are long lasting, or their behaviors have changed, things like that. Being really mindful on how deep their issues are running. So for example, let's say you haven't seen a friend of yours in class or at a team practice or something for multiple weeks on end. That's kind of a flag that comes up in your mind. Maybe I should reach out. Maybe I should check in on them to see if they're okay. But yeah, we try to coach young people that we talk to how to recognize those warning signs within the people that they care about. Rowena, I can pass it over to you if you'd like.
No, that's great. And I think even giving young people more of the terminology to better understand when they themselves are struggling. A lot of young people, because in part because there's so much misinformation. There are a lot of terms when it comes to mental health flying around, but they aren't necessarily used appropriately. A lot of young people are self-diagnosing, or they're feeling like something is abnormal that potentially is going to pass. There's a whole bunch of different things that could be happening, but how do you actually really know that you yourself are undergoing some type of struggle? And how do we provide young people with enough information on what to do if that is the case, right? So I think help seeking, really working towards building a young person's ability to feel okay to ask for help, to know where to ask for help, and to know that help is on the other side, is going to be a way to help all of that. So of course, just even looking at all of the people who surround a young person and how we can better equip them is going to be really important. I think this is just to underline what Janelle's already mentioned, if all of you on the webinar just did the Be There certificate, it just gives you a framework by which you can potentially be that person. And I know as a mom of 3 teenagers, it's something I've done, and it really helps you, especially when it is so hard to have conversations with young people. If you are yourself not a young person once you get to a certain age, this helps you to really know how to either raise the issue, or if something is divulged to you, how to react in a way that you will inspire more conversation versus someone shutting down. And I think it's those little moments that will really contribute to much better outcomes.
If I could just jump in here, I see we have a number of questions left. If we could like rapid fire them, that would be helpful. Like 15 seconds per response, because there's like 20 questions left, and I think we have 7 minutes left.
All right, Michael, I'll fire this next one towards you. It is data related. We had a question, is there any data, this is very interesting, is there any data that is asked about friends of young people, collecting understandings not just about themselves, but of their friends? Because young people usually don't talk or are hesitant to talk about self-struggle, but are often very concerned about their friends.
So you can keep me to 10 seconds. The answer to this question is we don't specifically use the term friends, but we do ask whether individuals have a support system around them, friends and family. And we do draw strong connections between high levels of friends and families and support networks and a reduction in mental health diagnoses. So it is something we do study, and it is something that's definitely having an impact. 10 seconds.
Great, thank you. I had another question. Can you please give some practical examples of building resilience in youth for mental health?
not off the top of my head. I know there's been some work done by the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative and the Harvard Brain Story to look at this, which I tend to look at really well. Resiliency is like a muscle that can be developed through experience, but can also be trained through basically the same way you would work out a muscle, although it's more complex than that, but overly simplified. And those are the ones that I tend to go into. I don't know if Mel or Rowena have another suggestion.
Okay. Fantastic. We actually only have a couple left, so I can address one right now. This recording will be emailed out to all registrants, and in that, I will be including all links that were mentioned, I'm sure with the help of Janelle and Rowena. So we'll make sure every resource that was mentioned gets to your inboxes, and also you can keep an eye on our website where it will be posted as well. So another quick question, maybe not so quick, but this is in relation to well, economic arguments. So which economic arguments do you think are the most relevant when advocating for the prioritization of investments for promotion and prevention of child and youth mental health?
Do you want to go first on this one, Rowena or Janelle?
Prevention is obviously going to save the system a lot of money. It's actually, there have been calculations done. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it is actually astronomical when you think about the amount that mental health, the mental health crisis actually costs our system, even in terms of indirect costs. So I will just leave it at that. It is obviously a huge push towards prevention and health promotion.
I will throw into that there have been studies looking at return on investment for mental health investments. I know that everyone likes to point to that 2011 study from the commission and about saying it was $60 billion a year. There's another one from Conference Board, which looks at economic impacts in terms of absenteeism and presenteeism and issues. When I started adding it up, and I've done some math, I'm finding it's over $130 billion a year in terms of costs. And a lot of that, if we're to be invested, a fraction of it in youth mental health would save us would increase our economic output and reduce our economic expenditures, and everything from correlated issues with substance use and to the amount of money we're spending on healthcare systems towards mental health, which is about 7%, but we're also spending a fortune as it pertains to community-based mental health, a ton of money on other things too. So it's high.
Thank you so much. And I have one question left. I wanted to end on this one. It is a strong question. It's an important one. And we do have 2 minutes left, so this one doesn't need to be rapid fire. So we had a question. Do you think adolescents really understand their emotional health triggers, suppression, and processing of feelings? And alongside that, how and when should we teach this?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, sure.
Like verb.
Do you think adolescents really understand their emotional health, their triggers, suppression, processing of feelings, and how and when should we teach this?
Well, this is about self-regulation essentially. And we do teach it. Parents teach it, teachers teach it. It's a pretty much a standard piece of the especially early childhood education in terms of understanding those things. Could we do better? Yes. But I would say we are doing that pretty strong. In fact, I think our early childhood education is quite good in this country. I would say that we could be doing better as we go through those, 6 to 16 age periods, would be something that I would focus on.
I think, sorry, Michael, if I can quickly add to that, I agree. I think that it goes back to the literacy conversation as well. Young people might not have the words to articulate how they're feeling. It makes me think of the emotions wheel. They might be mad or they might be frustrated, but they might not know how deep that goes and the correct word to use. So yeah, I do think young people and adolescents understand their emotional health and certain triggers and things like that. It just goes also back to the literacy piece. Just continue to provide them with the knowledge and the correct language and literacy so they can properly articulate these things. And in terms of when we should be teaching it, again, I think we started at a good age, but it's continuing that through the 6 to 16 age group.
I did notice that a lot of questions are being answered in the chat by some of our colleagues as well too. So I saw a lot of questions, but now I'm seeing there's a lot of answers to it. So thanks, Shane. I saw Shauna, I saw Brittany, you answered a few questions here. So thanks for saving us some trouble here answering some of these questions.
Well, I seem to have lost my PowerPoint, but the last slide was basically just a huge thank you to everyone who's joining. I'll let Michael do the final sign off, but I wanted to say if anybody has any questions or feedback on this webinar, we are more than happy to hear it. If you could email us at info@mhrc.ca, that would be fantastic. And I'm going to hand it over to Michael for a final goodbye.
Well, I just want to thank Rowena and Janelle for joining us. As many people here might know, we do host a webinar after every poll result. We're very excited to have Jack.org as our partner for this one. We're really excited to see this will be available on our YouTube channels, which I have no idea how they work because I'm not a young person. But I'm very fortunate to have great ones who work with us who can put this up on YouTube. So thank you so much, Rowena. Thank you so much, Janelle. Thank you, Akila, for your introduction at the beginning. And thank you so much, Brittany, for your efforts to organize this. And really thank you to everyone who joined and asked so many great questions. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.